Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode of the Digital Dentistry Decoded podcast. We are here to keep you in the know of all things digital dentistry. Now, I have another amazing guest. This is Ayush Bagla, the former CEO of Ackuretta and now the managing director at Pac-Dent. Ayush, nice to see you, my friend. How you been?
Nice to see you too, Ahmad. Yeah, I've been good. It was great to see you in Dubai and in Chicago. Interesting times in our industry. And yeah, happy to reconnect and be a part of the podcast.
Thanks for being here, man. Yeah, it's true. It is certainly interesting times for digital dentistry. I feel like, in a way, it's not as crazy as before. I feel like the number of releases have calmed down a little bit, but yeah, still some interesting stuff coming out. What's your feel on the industry right now?
Absolutely. I think the dental industry as overall has been going through some headwinds over the last 2 years. And you can see it with some of the market caps of the larger companies. And yeah, the technology has slowed down a little bit in terms of the developments. I do believe IDS had some launches, but so far this year, I don't think there's been some significant game-changing launches in the digital sphere.
Yeah, I totally agree, man. Nothing that's really caught massive headlines. We're seeing more and more incremental upgrades here and there. But before we get into that, it's been a while since we've spoken. And there's been some really big shifts in the industry, even though there's no big releases. I mean, one is Pac-Dent, of course, acquiring your company, which congratulations. Tell us about it. How's it going? How's it been? You're not the boss anymore. How's everything going?
Yeah, it's a different chapter for me. 12, 13 years I ran Ackuretta. And now at Pac-Dent, it's a very different company, which has moved more into the dental space and dental technology. Ackuretta was more technology and dental. So very different from that perspective. And it has been a positive transition as an overall. A lot of times with M&A, culture fit is very important and aligning with strategic goals. And we've managed to do that. It's taken some time, but I think our time relative to other companies for such strategic fit has been positive. And now we are working on bigger projects and we want to combine digital dentistry and some of the technology that we have and the knowledge of clinical dentistry to drive the industry forward.
Amazing. And Pac-Dent, of course, they're one of the biggest resin manufacturers among a long list of things that company does. And it was an interesting move by the company. They're obviously trying to get into the hardware space. You've got this amazing resin manufacturer. You've got Ackuretta who makes the hardware. And how's that synergy going? Is it been mostly smooth sailing? What can we expect for the future?
Absolutely. It's a very interesting journey because it's a way for the industry to have a bridge between analog dentistry and digital dentistry. And what we observed over the years just being in the digital space is there is some gaps in the workflow that analog fulfills. So the workflow needs these analog steps and Pac-Dent fills those analog products and services for decades now. And when you combine that with digital, it's a very interesting combination. And when I say that, it's like when you do a crown case, you still need bonding, you still need etching, you still need stain and glaze, you still need a post-curing. So even if you have the best resin on the planet and the best printer, the best curing unit, the best CAD and CAM software, AI design, you still need some of these processes and materials in order to complete the case.
Yeah, that's actually quite an interesting point you bring up. And you're right. You obviously need to put it in the patient's mouth. And that's true because I think Pac-Dent, I really get into their resins and of course, Rodin and Titan and all of that. They're amazing resins. I didn't even know they do like bonding agents. Do they do cements and stuff as well?
Yeah, great question, right? It's the industry's best kept secret. I don't know if it's a good thing, but they make some fantastic luting cements and bonding, desensitizing materials, even the etching. So some of those things are sold with the palette kit and the Envision veneer system. So the goal is to complete those workflows and we started introducing those and you're going to see more of that coming from us.
Yeah, there is a fascinating thing that's happening where these companies are kind of absorbing other companies and putting everything in-house, let's say. Do you think consolidation is going to keep happening in digital dentistry? Is it going to be a more common trend going forwards?
I definitely see the market consolidating. Last year, there was a couple of acquisitions, there was a couple of consolidations with different companies. And you will see more because the cost of customer acquisition is quite high. And in order to do that, manufacturers will need a significantly larger wallet share from the customers. And that's possible with integration of more technologies, because developing competency in-house to cover digital, analog, software, materials, hardware, services, sales, and marketing is very difficult for one company to do. And the few companies that are trying that are people like Dentsply and Straumann, and they have a certain scale and a muscle power to do it. But when the others don't, they need to find creative ways to acquire these resources. And that would typically be through consolidation.
And it's also interesting that you mentioned, it's been, I would say, a tough market. Obviously, in any market, you have some companies that do well, some that don't do well. Do you think overall, when you reflect, obviously, you ran Ackuretta, now you're in Pac-Dent. The past 12 months, I mean, I can only speak for myself and dentists all around the globe that I speak to. I mean, it's been pretty tough. And now with everything that's going on geopolitically, it doesn't look like it's going to ease up. Is that kind of what you're seeing on your side as well? It's been a tough 12 months.
We personally don't see it that way. Our business is enjoying significant double-digit growth. And I would say a reason why we don't see that is because the company is more of a research company than a marketing machine. And because of our very strong research ability, every week we're coming out with new patented technologies. And I don't mean that metaphorically, it's the truth. So we realize that in the digital market, 95% of the users are not even using biocompatible applications. So it shows that there's a lot of headroom for the market to grow. However, the current solutions that are there in the market are not really solving for the market pain points. And that's what our new technology and patents are geared towards, solving some of the industry gaps. And as we solve for the value proposition for the customers, I'm sure we will enjoy market share, and other companies will learn from us and also increase the market share, and therefore the penetration of 3D printing in both chairside and lab.
Do you see growth in 3D printing currently? Is it like increasing how fast people want it to go? I mean, it seems like every modern lab has a 3D printer, so that's kind of reached pretty good saturation, I would say. But what about chairside? Are you guys seeing that kind of growth and adoption, or it's kind of tapered off?
I think that's a very good question and a very good assessment. So at the lab side, in mature markets, at least 70-80% of the labs are using 3D printing, and they're quite adept at doing it. And I would say a main reason for the adoption was that the CAD became a lot easier and accessible, and the materials started getting better. With regard to chairside, the adoption in a mature market like US is about 18%. However, most of them are still doing models, and very few are doing biomaterials. And as you may know, our company's strength is in the biomaterials. So we see that we are enjoying the growth from a materials standpoint, very healthy growth, just because of the reorders on materials. However, on the equipment side, there is a slowdown, and we've spoken to some of the other companies, and we see that, I won't say adoption is stagnated or reducing, but there is a slowdown in the growth rate of adoption.
Yeah, I do wonder if it's just dentists, are pulling back, because I don't know. It's pretty hard times out there for a lot of people. But, it is also really fascinating. You bring up that point of, one thing is adoption of 3D printers. And I think a key metric that we don't really talk about too much in the industry is utilization, because I think those are two way different things. And anecdotally, if we compare it to milling machines, a lot of people that adopt milling machines chairside, usually their utilization is quite high. But with printers, it's kind of like what you said, where a lot of people are still just printing models and maybe a splint here and there. Is that kind of your read as well?
Yes, at the moment, I would say that's a fair assessment. And we aim to change that narrative with some of the biomaterials. And it's not an easy task, because it's not just the material, it's the entire user experience, the education and the finishing protocols. And we are fortunate to have a lot of these pieces in-house thanks to the acquisition, where machine, material, software are all able to talk to each other under one roof. And we understand the service and the delivery mechanism. A lot of companies, if you observe closely, are missing competencies in some of these areas, or are working with partners in some of these areas. So they don't have total control over the entire process and workflow, and therefore are unable to push the current boundaries significantly enough to gain the adoption that they would like.
We spoke about 2 years ago, I think, or something like that. And when we first spoke about crown printing, 2 years is a long time, and that discussion has changed quite a lot. I won't forget, because it was very interesting what you told me. You told me that there's, in your mind, a theoretical limit to how strong a printed crown is. And that's just the limit that we can't beat with this current technology. Is that kind of still your position? Do you feel like, as much filler as we pump into these things, there is a limit that we just have to accept? And then it's whether the industry as a whole and dentists accept that for what it is, and it's good enough for a permanent crown. Is that still how you're feeling and reading things?
I would say with the current apparatus of printers, that's the limitation. However, if the apparatus changes, then some of the boundary conditions of the current apparatus are no longer valid. So there's a chance to push the barrier. And another aspect which was interesting, and this is some of the dental knowledge of a company like Pac-Dent, is on the bonding side, on staining and glazing, how those materials can influence the quality of the crown, the strength of a crown, the aesthetics of a crown, and the longevity of a crown, thanks to, let's say, reducing the sorption. Those aspects are, neglected aspects, because everybody focused on one parameter, which is flex strength and flex modulus, but that's just one part of the story. So to answer your question, I would say that yes, we could increase that with new apparatus. How much could we increase it? I would say it would be tough to reach the level of an Emax, but some of those downsides could be negated with the other materials that are used in bonding or etching.
Yeah, that'd be fascinating to watch that evolve over time. Now, as we talk about technology and new releases and what's to come, you guys had a pretty significant Chicago Midwinter, so congratulations. I think at the show you released 3 new products, the Sol SE, the Chroma Flash, and the new CrownPod, I believe it's called. I'd love to talk through them. So Sol SE, my read is it's basically a faster Sol. Is there anything else that we need to know?
Well, primarily it's a faster Sol. However, the software and firmware have been enhanced so that the user experience is a lot more streamlined. We observed over the last 4 or 5 years some of the areas where customers were finding, let's say, some kind of tech support tickets or had questions on how to optimize their usage. So we took care of some of those niggling things. So it could be a long-standing printer in our stable and serve a lot more customers in the coming year.
And with the Sol SE itself, I don't know if it's a trade secret or how did you make it faster?
The Z-axis mechanism is one of the primary areas where increasing the motor capacity and the motor performance. Plus, we engineered some new resins that are more suitable for LCD printing. There's certain things that we could do to the power and the backlight as well to generate some more power. So I'd say it's primarily these 3 areas.
Fascinating. And what does SE stand for? I'm just curious.
Just like special edition. Yeah. So it's a little bit of a jump from the Sol, but let's say it's not big enough a jump to warrant a completely new series.
Fair enough. And you guys obviously had the Chroma Flash. So I don't know if people listening are familiar with the Auto Flash, but please tell us about why we should care about something like this, because most people, they don't really think of their curing box too much. They have a cure. They might have bought it third party or it comes with their printer. A lot of people that are really deep in the weeds of 3D printing really like the Auto Flash. I mean, the floor is yours. What should we know about this kind of technology? And why did you guys make the Chroma Flash?
It's a very good question. So Pac-Dent has been developing this kind of flash unit for almost 3 years. And that's where a company like Ackuretta helped them post-acquisition, put this project together and get it to a commercial stage. The thing about users is they underestimate that printing is only a part of the process. But actually, 80% of the parts are cured in the post-curing unit, and only 20% of the curing happens on the printer. So our curing unit takes a slightly different approach compared to many systems in the market. And by that, I mean, instead of relying solely on LEDs, it uses broad spectrum bulb system, which provides natural light distribution, helps achieve more accurate shade reproduction. So in essence, we noticed that a lot of the LED units were not yielding the accurate shade, especially on restorative and denture materials, and especially on the splints, where the parts turned out a bit yellow or translucent. So our main reason for using this sort of bulb system was we needed the aesthetic accuracy. And the system can also integrate with nitrogen curing environments, but in many cases, we find the curing performance is already strong enough without it. So technically, we don't need the nitrogen. And more importantly, the unit is integrated into the workflow. So the user doesn't have to think about the curing parameters. Everything's automated, easy to operate, and dialed in the system directly from printer to curing box. So they don't really need to manually input any information.
And when is the Chroma Flash coming out?
So we've already started taking some pre-orders, and I would say the deliveries would be in June.
What's the unit cost, if you don't mind me asking? And let's say the USD is the most common market.
Yeah, so in America, we're pricing those at about $3,500 retail.
Yes.
And for the functionality it has, it's a steal.
You guys already have a really good curing box in Accurate. I really like the CURIE Plus, to be honest. We still use it in the lab often. How's this going to fit in this whole portfolio? Is this for people that want something a bit better than CURIE Plus, or how do you guys going to, communicate that to dentists who are looking at these two curing boxes and may not really understand what flash curing is and LED curing is?
So we plan to reposition the CURIE Plus more for labs where they would like to cure between 6 and 8 arch-sized parts at a time. And this curing unit is more suitable for maybe 2 arch-sized parts at a time, or let's say 1 denture set at a time. So in terms of its production throughput, it's kind of low, but it's, let's say, more focused on class 2 applications. And the larger real estate would be focused on maybe models, something like surgical guides or large batch processing. But we do observe that, yes, if people want that high quality of aesthetic accuracy, then it's preferable to use this unit. And if they're okay with the aesthetic accuracy of the CURIE Plus, then, that's great. They wouldn't need to upgrade to this unit.
And the Chroma Flash, again, just going back to the point of the technology. So it's like everyone seems to use flash in their word, auto flash, Chroma Flash. So you're telling me it's a bulb that flashes on and off many times to cure a part? And how's that better than, you're an engineer guy, you would be the perfect person to ask. How's that better than just a standard LED? Like, why is there so much interest in the auto flash at the time? Why is it so beloved? What is so special about this technology class?
Well, we had this burning question for years, and when we dug into it, we realized that the biomaterials were reacting very well to wide spectrum wavelength. So the auto flash and even our Chroma Flash has a spectrum from between 280 nanometers to at least 900 or 950 nanometers. So it's very high UV, with short wavelength and also with long wavelength. And because of that, you could get deep curing and you can also get high power. So the parts were curing significantly better and you had enhanced mechanical properties. Now, when it comes to an LED system, the wavelength window of an LED system with, let's say, a 405 LED would only be between 390 to 420, so about 30 nanometer, while the bulb system was more than 600 nanometer. So the quality of the curing with the photoinitiators in the resin was significantly better with the bulb system.
You think this is the future of curing? I mean, bulbs are arguably better than LEDs, especially in, let's say, the cases that dentists are going to do, which is splints. If you want your splints to come out nice and your crowns, if the bottle says A2, actually come out as A2, this is, in your eyes, a better system for curing?
Absolutely. I mean, think about it. The Auto Flash came out in the 90s. The product looks like it was made in the 70s. But, credit to them, it's the gold standard even till today. Every company, every chemical producer, and every user always raves about the performance they enjoy with the Auto Flash. And that's for good reason. We've made our improvements based on that technology platform. And we would like to deliver this kind of value add and solution to the end user so that they can produce the materials of the future.
It's fascinating, man. And okay, so we covered the cure. You actually also talked about nitrogen, actually. I want to take a step back. You talked about nitrogen curing, whether it's needed, whether it's not. And I want to talk about this topic as well, because I've seen kind of a total, I was going to say 180 or 360 or whatever you want to say, total change in people's opinions about nitrogen curing, especially in groups and forums and all of that. I'm sure we're in the same groups, Facebook and all of that. Yeah, there was a lot of interest in nitrogen curing, and now it seems to be that everyone's kind of said it's not really needed and just use glycerin. What's your take on that? And now hearing it from you that perhaps maybe with these sort of bulb flash units, we don't need nitrogen. So again, what's your feel on curing with nitrogen?
So it depends on every system. Now, when we were selling LED systems with nitrogen, we saw that the surface finish was a lot better. And we observed that the surfaces were better, like, let's say, more cured. So with the same curing time, if you don't have nitrogen, then the parts would turn out a little bit wet or sticky. So it means that the parts are not reaching its final mechanical property. And we observed that, at least with our new curing unit, the Chroma Flash, we didn't need the nitrogen. We didn't see that significant improvement in performance with and without nitrogen on the same part with the same conditions. And I think that changes unit to unit. So with regard to the glycerine, it's the same principle as nitrogen, where you're trying to create an inhibition layer on the surface and you're trying to protect the surface from damage. It does work, but the parts could turn out sticky. There could be other challenges. And both work, they have their merits. And again, it's very technique sensitive and it depends very much on the curing unit that one is using. The good thing is with our material science, we don't need it, at least with the Rodin materials. It's not a must to have nitrogen. And we did that as a conscious decision over the past few years. The development team understood that, if they want to play in the open system market and have everybody use Rodin materials and democratize the material availability, then it's got to work on all kinds of curing units. And not everybody has nitrogen, wants nitrogen, or needs. So a part of the material chemistry team their focus was essentially to develop material to prevent this kind of scenario.
So you're thinking that with the right curing box, with the right materials, the whole discussion with oxygen inhibition layer, etc., is that kind of in the past, would you say? Or
I would say, at least for our materials and our processes, it's in the past. It would be difficult to generalize on every single material. And it's also easier, I would like to mention, it's easier for a chemical team to suggest the use of nitrogen with the curing unit from a development standpoint.
Fascinating. We'll have to test your claims on that one, Ayush. But you guys make amazing resins, and I don't know, do you know what the percentage of people that are actually curing under nitrogen is? I can't imagine it's that many.
I'm sure it's less than 1%.
Yeah, it's not like, it's funny, this discussion gets so much airtime, and you use nitrogen, you use glycerin, but I don't actually, all the labs I've seen and, I go to, and a lot of dentists I speak to, they're just curing and printing normally. So it's a fascinating thing where we talk a lot about it, but what actually happens in clinics is quite a lot different.
Absolutely. I mean, there's empirical data that shows that 80% of the dental professionals are still doing models, and they don't really need it, and the others are doing basic indications. So there's only that top 10% that are actually doing the biocompatible workflows, maybe 15 at most. And many of them don't really have the knowledge or the budgets or the inclination to make these sort of big ticket investments into the infrastructure. And even if they have, they may not be inclined to. So it's not a high priority for a lot of clinicians. From a very realistic standpoint, yes, everything seems better when you have all these things in your workflow and your practice. But if you have a limited amount of budget, which every operation does, they would choose to spend their money on other areas of their business. And I'm sure as a business owner, you know how that goes.
Yeah, no, 100%. And like I say, especially these times, they're not exactly great times. I think all around the world, people are feeling the crunch. And what's the other interesting things, that kind of data that you give about how little people actually utilize their printer for other indications? And I'd have to agree, I've heard this kind of data from many people. And what do you think it is? You as a company, you want to sell more resins. You want people to do more splints and crowns, chairside, of course. What's the big gap here? Why do you think there's not more people doing, let's not talk about a crown, because there's a lot of conflict about whether that's long-term or not, and convincing dentists that that's a suitable permanent crown option. But let's say a splint. Why do you see not that many clinicians printing splints in-house, at least?
It's a good question. And I think a lot of the answer is due to the CAD, even though for professionals like yourself, making a splint out of, let's say, Medit Splint Studio or one of the other splint softwares, it's very easy to do it. But CAD seems to be the largest bottleneck for why digital manufacturing chairside is not really taken off.
I think with AI, it will now blow up and we're going to see the floodgates open.
Certainly with AI, you're going to see more adoption. You saw this thing coming a couple of years ago when Medit came out with, software that was distributed for free, and how the market changed. Before, previous users needed to pay thousands of dollars to a professional company. And the moment some free software started coming out, it was very clear, the writing was on the wall, that the adoption is going to go up. And with AI, that's going to further the progress. And I know that the industry is definitely waiting for softwares first. The material science is proven with the splints, with hard, with the soft, with, different colors on splints. So Splints has the depth of applications. It's got global certifications as well. And there's enough case history and data around it. So it's a very, let's say, proven product, unlike some of the other debatable class 2 restorations. And we've made some of the world's most interesting splints using our Glaze technology. When we glaze the splint, the aesthetics are just phenomenal. And people love to buy something which is more aesthetic than something which lacks that. So we're able to add value, and our Glaze is even able to touch the analog splints. So it's not limited to just digital products. And that's one of the areas where the adoption of a humble device like the splint is going to really ramp in the future.
No, it's interesting. And I guess the last product, we shouldn't forget it. We went on a tangent there, but anyway, last product. So we talked about the Solid-C, the Chroma Flash. We have the CrownPod printer. Is that the name, CrownPod?
Yes, at the moment. Let's say it's a code name for us to start.
And so you guys showcased it in Chicago Midwinter, another pod printer. You talked to me about some interesting things there where, the concept is to kind of be able to potentially design and print all in one device, or, it's almost like an all-in-one unit. But for those who are listening and haven't seen the CrownPod, and tell us about it. What's going on? What's this new tech that you guys are investing in?
Well, the pod printer is interesting because it reflects a shift in how we think about digital dentistry workflows. So traditionally, digital dentistry requires multiple expensive pieces of equipment your scanners, CAD software, trained technicians. But what we're exploring is CAD-less workflow, where the clinician can produce devices without complex design steps. And the module that we showed at Chicago was for pediatric dentists. So we did an assessment that a pediatric dentist purchases in the inventory of the crown kits. Each of those kits cost between $10,000 and $15,000, maybe more.
You're talking about stainless steel crowns.
Yeah, SSCs, or even New Smile's got some interesting ones, and then there's Pro Temps from 3M. And in a year, they're going through between $200,000 to $500,000 of inventory. So it's a significant amount of money per clinic. And this market is over $100 million just in US for one application. So with our part system, we have a template library using AI. The dentist could measure the teeth with a manual gauge and print the crown on demand using pre-validated designs. So they don't need a scanner, they don't need a CAD software, and they're able to produce a crown on demand with digital inventory. And the main problem that we are solving for the market would be three things. The first thing is that if you buy a box of crowns, you use a few of them, but you don't use the others. And then you need to buy a new box, and certain crowns get consumed faster, and the rest of it may need to be binned if they don't get consumed quickly. And doing the inventory audit on that at the end of the year for financial audit purpose is a headache. I'm sure you've been through this. And on average, a dentist loses 4 cases a year because they don't have the right crown size available to them. So if you consider these different aspects, it's a very interesting market proposition that's, let's say, solving for one of the bottlenecks in the market and catering to a market gap that is currently completely unaddressed.
I think it's interesting that you guys are taking this like a total business approach to this CrownPod printing. And I hear you out. I mean, stainless steel crowns haven't been changed for a very long time. I'll be curious to see if you can convince pediatric dentists to kind of change their mind where, using something that's metal and bulletproof to try and printing something. I'm more curious about what you can do with the platform. Like, I'm not a pediatric dentist. I'm at, GDP. And so I don't do pediatric crowns. And to me, it's interesting to launch a product like this in such a niche, even though I hear what you're saying. But like for me as a general dentist, what are you guys going to do with this pod printer? What do you envision for this? Because you've invested a ton of money. And one of the most interesting things that I liked about it was the resin mixer, or not mixer, sorry, they change it. So you can load it up with a bunch of bottles. It changes bottles. I think that's pretty cool, almost like a disc changer for a mill. But, aside from pediatric crowns, what do you see with this technology? Because I'm sure a lot of people want to understand, surely this can't just be for pedo crowns, because most people do pedo crowns.
Very good question. So we have a roadmap of more than 20 applications that we plan to roll out over the next few years on this technology platform. And pediatric is just the first one. Of course, you can do crown and bridge, you can do inlay, onlay, overlays. You can do them all with the same unit, and it's the same disposal mechanism. And we have an ability to put in 8 different bottles of resin. Could be crown and bridge, it could be dentures, it could be splints, could be for all-on-4 models, you name it. And we disperse the resin, prints out your part, very efficient workflow. It's a one-time use build platform and VAT. And the product has a very low failure rate because each time there's fresh resin, there's a fresh build platform, there's a fresh VAT. And we've got some IP around these things to ensure that the printer is running stably. And at the same time, the key is that we have a resin mixer and heater inside each bottle. So through the day, the product is mixing itself. So the fillers don't just settle at the bottom, and the performance changes over time. So with that, the second module, which is in our wheelhouse, would be to do with whitening trays. It's a very interesting platform called Rodin works, where you will have these applications. So we've come out with pediatric crown, whitening trays next, and you'll have more along the way. So with whitening trays, the vision is that we could make template library based whitening trays, 3D print the trays for the patient. And after that, we use not only the tray and the mouth, but Pac-Dent, lesser known fact, we white label whitening materials for Dentsply Sirona. And we also have a gingival protection product. So if you add those things up, we have a very interesting technology suite, which moves from analog to digital. And on the post-op side, once you're done with the whitening treatment and the gingival barrier, we have a very unique technology called CPIC, which is calcium phosphate ion clusters. And we package that into a product called Promine F. And it's a post-op where it has a texture like toothpaste, and you put that on your teeth and it mineralizes the teeth. So after whitening, you have demineralization and sensitivity. So this removes and alleviates the sensitivity and it mineralizes the teeth. And we are also looking to develop a toothpaste with such mineralization ability so that the average patient can access very high-end mineralization technology at very affordable prices and enjoy a painless experience on professional whitening done the right way. So for us as a company, we would be able to package hardware, software, 5 different materials. And that's just one of the applications. And as you can understand, and you may have got some insight on what Pac-Dent does as a company, we will come out with more applications and therefore more procedures, which after the digital workflow, which merge into analog to finish the cases.
It's quite interesting, man. It's like vertical integration in a way. You guys kind of do it all. And like you say, digital, analog, it kind of makes sense. If you're going to make the whitening trays, why not provide the whole workflow end to end? I'm curious what you guys are going to do with this CrownPod, man. It's fascinating that you've pivoted in this way from, Pac-Dent materials company, of course, to now this pod printer. To take it back to digital, do you, as a, CEO of a printer company formerly, do you see pod printing as the future of Chairside? Because we're seeing more and more of these pop up. Midas, Planmeca, Asiga, print pods, now you guys. Do you think there's true merit in this pod printing?
Yes, we see that pod printing has some of its merit suitable for Chairside, primarily because the failure rate in a pod printer is significantly lower than a generic printer. It's just because the conditions are controlled and clinicians are able to pay a premium to ensure that the results and the outcomes are predictable and consistent. So they have no problem in swapping things out. We've seen this with the milling world, where you have a one-time use part or one-time use consumable. And because they're able to pay that from a manufacturer standpoint, we're able to design a solution which serves them value, saves them time, as a dentist time in a place like US is $6 a minute. So they value their time more than some amount of the wastage. And they're able to do things that bring their business value rather than becoming a dental technician in their office.
Makes sense, man. And do you see adoption going to be increased chairside printing? I mean, because a lot of people now with these pod printers, it's kind of hard to decide because you're almost, let's talk about the Splinray Midas. It does crowns, restorative. Of course, they did their bigger platform now so they can increase what you can do with that printer. But it's almost creating a situation where you need your pod printer for your restorative and then you need your normal printer for your general dentistry. So a chairside clinician is just going to have 2 printers in their office. Is that kind of the future?
Maybe with some of the other companies that you mentioned, that's the path that they are looking for. However, because we're vertically integrated with analog and digital, our workflows are different. And we look at the market where we say, one printer or at least one type could solve for these applications that people would typically ever need to do chairside. The key is that we're not trying to compete with any of the other companies because they don't have the portfolio that we have. And that gives us a lot more depth in our lineup and a lot more impact in the workflow that we are trying to focus on. And whitening is a good example of that.
That is a fascinating example. When you think of 3D printing, almost no one talks about lining trays. Obviously, it's all just crowns and splints, but by all means, if you guys can pull it off, and it could be game-changing. So with the CrownPod printer, or is it called CrownPod? I keep saying CrownPod, but we're talking about lining trays now, so it's throwing me off. But CrownPod it is for now, the code name. When is it expected to be released?
So Q3 this year, we will begin shipments. And as you can imagine, there's significant interest around the product. We're very cautious with our approach, and we aim to surprise on release.
Well, we have to look out for it, man. I guess moving on from, busting your balls about the releases. What about general printing? What's your kind of vibe, Ayush? You've been in the 3D printing game for a while.
It seems like there's an oversupply of printers in the market, and that's the reason led to a market correction where the differentiation between each system or each solution is not significant. So dentals, unlike other industries, like in the consumer market, it's a finite market. So as it's a finite market, there's a lot of companies with low differentiation fighting for the same customer base, which makes it very difficult. So with that in mind, the companies who are able to innovate and solve for the bottlenecks in the print industry will be able to capture some of the uncaptured market share in the blue ocean. And the others who are not able to innovate will pretty much be working against one another. And that would be, quite a dog-eat-dog fight, I would say.
And do you see any exciting things at the moment? Like you obviously have some insights about digital dentistry. Is there anything that excites you or things that we should look out for? What's your kind of read on things and what's to come this year?
I think there's a lot of companies trying to solve for the CAD workflow, let's say limitations or the bottlenecks of the CAD workflow. And I've seen some very interesting software on the ortho side, ortho AI softwares, which are able to do the analysis, the treatment planning, and create automated aligner design very efficiently. So I thought that was quite interesting. And in terms of materials, I see that there's a lot more materials that you're going to be seeing in the market. Some were announced at Chicago, like Adite came out with a zirconia material. We all know that they're very good with the zirconia discs for milling, but now, they're putting their head into the ring in the printing side. So very interesting to see that. And just like that, there's going to be more launches and more inroads from different companies who are looking to get in with interesting materials, differentiated materials. And HeyGears came out with something interesting on the denture side with multi-material printing. I think it's a very interesting concept. We actually developed concepts like this about 6-7 years ago. So I'm very curious to see the details on how they've solved for some of the bottlenecks that we encountered in our developmental journey.
I saw that multi-material printing. It's actually interesting you bring it up. They said it's kind of like two printers side by side, almost connected together, two VATs. It prints suture base and then it prints teeth. Is that kind of how it is?
That's how it is. And we've made systems like that. I think the key question is the throughput of the system and how efficient it is in producing dentures, because you have systems like Stratasys and the Nextent jetting printers that are very efficiently able to produce high volume of dentures with great strength and aesthetics. So curious to see how HeyGears with their polymer technology are able to do that and compare with the throughput of the others. As with jetting, there's no post-processing needed.
I'm curious to how they're freaking doing it just from from my understanding, it's not washing and curing in that box. It's just printing and then printing the other one. How are you preventing mixing of those resins, the denture base with the teeth resin?
That's a good question. So we've made such a system before. In between both the vats, they have another vat, which is basically like a sponge. And the gantry moves from one vat to the sponge and from the sponge to the other vat. So it absorbs any kind of liquid resin.
It's fascinating. And also, I totally agree with things moving and moving arms. There's got to be a hit to the efficiency of the system. I mean, one thing that comes to mind is prime print when it first came out, because of the moving arm and the constant, everything was engineered really nicely, but it took ages to print anything when it first came out. And so that's a really fascinating point. And PolyJet's also a really cool technology. You know what we need to see? And you guys should develop a commercially viable PolyJet printer for Chairside. A lot of these Stratuses and these next-gen systems, they're huge and expensive. I mean, is that even viable, something like that?
Believe it or not, like they have a lot of the government and the military contracts. So they have no problem selling those away from the general market, where average labs and average clinics won't even consider it. So they cater to that top 1%, top 5% of the market. And with that ticket size, that's more money than other companies like us would be trying to gather in the next 20% of the market. So it's just a different part of the market that, let's say, we don't come across every day.
100%. And PolyJet is interesting technology, man. I feel like they could be unlocked so much more. I mean, even NextDent and Stratuses, like we say, the dentures they used to show with polyjetting, let's say 4 or 5 years ago, were kind of really ugly. And now they're improving. And it's kind of like a sleeper company, because they don't really make too much noise. They don't get really too many headlines about what they're releasing and developing, but you just see them at these conferences and they have new stuff that they're showing, and it's actually starting to look quite good.
Absolutely. Like I said, it's government projects, it's tenders, it's universities, it's education projects, and they're able to get traction over there, and the ticket size is large. So they're able to accumulate a very high amount of revenue, this different business segment that the average printer or material is not a part of.
Not part of that discussion. That's it. Anyway, I really appreciate your time, Ayush. Let's wrap it up. What's your final advice? So you told me there's only 18% of clinics in the US, which is the leading market. So everyone else is less than that. They have a printer. And 20% of them print things that aren't models. What's your advice for clinicians out there? 2026 is going to be our year. People are going to digitize, even though we've been talking about it for a while now. What's your advice for people listening about 3D printing and digital dentistry as a whole?
Well, with digital dentistry, it's entering a new phase. And the first phase was talking about the scanners, the CAD software, and the printers. And, you've done a lot about the scanner comparisons and the printer comparisons from 2021 to 2025. But the next phase is about integrating digital manufacturing with real clinical workflows, so dentists can deliver better treatments faster and more predictably.
That's the key, eh?
Yep.
And what's your advice for someone out there looking for their first printer? How do they choose? You said there's a complete oversupply of printers out there. What do you do?
I would say they should
go buy a Pac-Dent. No, I'm joking.
I wish, but I would say they should educate themselves by talking to somebody who's a little further up the journey. And, IDD is a very good education source for that. MOD does that as well. And Rick Ferguson does that as well with digital implant educators. They always give sound advice from a consultative standpoint on what people need, what they would like to achieve, and where they are in their expectations, and how this technology can meet those and in what timeline. So I think there's a consultative process to know a bit more before they take the leap.
I totally agree, man. It is such an amazing industry and how it's developed. And, I got into digital 10 years ago. There was no one out there. You just kind of bought stuff and trial and error. And now you're totally right. All these amazing people, all these amazing organizations, they're just wanting to help and teach people and kind of pass the baton on to the next person who's going to adopt digital. And I couldn't give better advice, guys. You just need to talk to someone that's done it before. We all have our friends. Most dentists, their friends are dentists, at least from my experience. Talk to your colleagues that have done this before. And that's pretty much one of the number one movers in adopting digital technology. It's not the brand. It's not the price. One of the biggest movers from research that I actually carried out, a big survey of over, I think it was 10,000 dentists. was referral by a colleague. So learn from your colleagues, guys. This is the year to digitize and get into 3D printing. I strongly believe that every single clinic in the future will have a scanner and a 3D printer. But Ayush, thank you so much for your time, my man. I know you're a very busy guy. You're not quite the CEO, but pretty much probably working like a CEO in that company. So I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for joining us.
No worries. Thank you, Ahmad. It was a pleasure to be here. And I look forward to catching up with you again.
Yeah, I hope so. And I hope we catch up soon, man. So guys, that's another episode of the Digital Dentistry Decoded podcast. Thanks for listening. Share with your colleagues, share with your friends, all those colleagues that we talked about. Share this podcast with them. It helps us out a lot. And I will see you in the next episode. Thanks for listening.